Before I knew what spirituality was, before I had language for psychology, a dream kept returning like a quiet knock inside my life. I would be walking through a corridor that curved inward, not sharply, not like a trap, but like a spiral waiting for me. I never reached the center before waking, yet I always carried the same instruction out with me. If you go deeper, you will need a way back. Years later, when I met the old stories with adult eyes, I realized how many cultures already knew this architecture. The Greeks placed it in the labyrinth, not as a children's tale, but as a warning about what happens when a man enters complexity without orientation. The labyrinth was not built simply to confuse. It was built to contain what the kingdom refused to integrate. The Minotaur was not just a monster in a story. It was the shadow a civilization pushed into the center so it wouldn't have to face it directly. And the hero survives not because he is special, but because he holds onto something simple, a thread. Adriana's thread was not a mystical ornament. It was practical wisdom. If you descend into complexity, into the psyche, into meaning, into the unknown, you need a line that leads you back to the ordinary world. That dream now feels like a pre-verbal knowing, the psyche speaking in images before it can begin to put together sentences. Jung wrote that the unconscious communicates through symbols first, because symbols can carry what words cannot. Standing at the edge of the known world, the mind can begin to see the world itself as symbol and pattern. But symbols are not instructions on their own. They invite us to look deeper, not to abandon reality. The rule that keeps a man safe when symbols get loud is simple. Sleep still matters. Your body still sets the limits of what you can handle. Law and consequence still exist outside your head. Community keeps you honest. Discipline keeps you from floating off. Without that thread, a man can live inside his imagination and call it revelation, whilst his life quietly falls apart. The dream was an invitation, but it was also a boundary. Go inward, yes, but don't forget the way out, because the spiral is real, but so is the ground beneath your feet. My childhood had an unusual feature that I only understood much later. I did not grow up inside a single cultural story because of my family's connection to travel journalism. The world arrived early. Airports, foreign streets, different rituals, different rules. I watched people treat reality as if it had layers. A cathedral where candles burned like small stars. A marketplace where prayer rolled through the air like weather. A temple courtyard where the pace of the human body slowed down, even before anyone told you to. Traveling like that opens something subtle in a young mind. You begin to see that cultures do not simply agree about ideas. They live inside different maps of meaning. One place treats a mountain as scenery, another treats it as a living presence. One culture sees land as property, another treats it as an ancestor. What travel showed me, long before I had language for it, was sacred geography. Certain places acted like centers of gravity, places where people behaved as if the invisible was close enough to touch. Later, I would read scholars like Mircea Eliade, describing how traditional cultures organize their worlds around axis mundi, centers where heaven, earth, and human life meet. But as a child, I didn't need the concept. I felt the shift in the room. People softened their voices. They stood differently. They behaved as if consequence mattered more in certain places and certain environments. That was the quiet education of moving across traditions. It dismantled the assumption that reality has only one interpretation. Everywhere we went, some version of the sacred existed. Different language, different rituals, but the same recognition. Life has depth, and depth requires structure, ritual, rites, elders, rules, containers. Not to control people, but to stop people becoming unmoored. Because meaning can intoxicate, isolation can distort. Without accountability, any thought that feels profound can start to sound like truth. Travel did not make me wise, but it made me suspicious of one-dimensional reality. And it taught me an early version of the thread. If you explore what lies beyond the ordinary, you must be held by something ordinary. A body with rhythms, a life with discipline, a community that can say, you are drifting, and actually mean it. One moment at a sacred site stays with me more as a sensation than as a mere memory. It's as if you cross a threshold and the atmosphere changes physically in the body, as if centuries of attention have settled into the walls, the ground, and the air in those places. People move slower, their faces and their voices soften. My own breathing changes too, before I've even made a conscious decision for that to happen. I remember standing in those places as a child, feeling my body respond to something my mind did not yet understand. Time stretched in a strange way. A few minutes felt longer than ordinary minutes, as if the moment had thickened. Later, I would recognize this as the texture of numinous experience, something the body recognizes before the intellect catches up. Many of our journeys carried this quiet rhythm of pilgrimage without anyone calling them that. We traveled for work, for journalism, yet the pattern of moving between temples, churches, shrines, and old cities where people had prayed for centuries, if not millennia, created its own form of initiation. It was not magic, it was orientation. Christianity names this movement pilgrimage, the act of walking towards a place, because the journey itself changes you. Even without understanding that, my body understood the pattern. You enter a space that has held grief, prayer, confession, surrender, confusion, depth, and something in you becomes quieter. That is often how initiation begins. It is not often in the fireworks. It is within the crack in the modern assumption that reality is flat and one-dimensional. In Aboriginal traditions, songs carried through the land, turning the world into a map of story and spirit and vibration, where walking becomes remembering itself. Different culture, same truth. The outer environment can reorganize the inner one. Psychologically, the mechanism is simple. My nervous system was responding to container, to order, to repetition, to reverence and rule. The body often recognizes safety or seriousness before the intellect can explain it. But the crucial part came afterwards. Life returned. Food, sleep, school, ordinary time. The sacred did not cancel the practical. It did not exempt me from being a human animal with limits. And that return to body, to routine, is part of the education, or without grounding can destabilize a person. It can make someone chase something intense, mistake emotion for truth, and call that growth. Ancient systems knew this. Sacred spaces were held inside communities, not sold as private experiences. Thresholds came with rules, because the goal is not to feel the sacred once. The goal is to walk back into ordinary life without losing your mind, without losing your sleep, without losing your responsibilities, or without losing respect or consequence. As I grew older, another fascination formed. Quiet, persistent, almost obsessive. The names people used for God. The different ways cultures speak about the ultimate. In Islam, there are 99 names. Not 99 gods, but 99 aspects. The merciful, the subtle, the just, the hidden, each name pointing towards something too large to capture fully. In Jewish mysticism, sacred names of God are treated with such care that they are sometimes never spoken aloud. In Hindu traditions, the sacred arrives through mantra, ancient sound syllable vibrations, repeated until the mind softens and the body settles. Christianity carries its own invocations, whispered prayers, the name of Christ spoken in devotion. Across Africa and many other traditions, songs and names for spirits and ancestors carry similar reverence. At first, this looked like contradiction. How could everyone be certain while disagreeing so deeply? Over time, I realized something simpler. These were not scientific claims. They were languages, each tradition translating an encounter that sits beyond ordinary speech. When a young mind encounters many languages too early, something wakes up. The sense that reality is larger than the story you inherited at home. Myth carries this as the archetype of the divine child. Horus, Krishna, the infant Christ, a symbol of potential, of something new trying to be born in the world. But initiation systems also warn about the shadow of that archetype. The child who senses mystery can become easily inflated. He can believe he is exempt from limits. He can chase revelation and resent structure. That is how spiritual curiosity becomes spiritual immaturity. The correction is ancient and simple. Discipline before power. Regular sleep. A trained body. Community feedback that does not flatter you. Law and consequence that keeps you honest when you start believing your own stories. Without those anchors, the divine child becomes the eternal child. Always inspired, never accountable. Always speaking about their truth, but never living it. The 99 names did not teach me theology. They taught me humility. They implied that whatever is ultimate is too vast for one mind to hold cleanly. Long before I could explain it, something in me already sensed that reality was larger than language. And when a mind begins to think it holds that reality perfectly, grave danger begins. So the thread must be woven directly into curiosity. Wonder, yes, but also routines, boundaries, responsibility, because the sacred can open doors in a person. And once those doors open, you need structure, strong enough to keep you from walking through them at the wrong time, in the wrong state, and calling it destiny. The most important realization of that early period was not a single belief. It was the pattern beneath beliefs. Every culture explained it differently, yet human transformation followed the same architecture. You leave the familiar. You enter an in-between. You return changed. Anthropology later named this pattern rites of passage, separation, liminality, incorporation. But I did not learn it as theory first. I felt it as a rhythm of life. Travel itself was separation. Sacred sites were liminal zones. Coming home again was incorporation, back into ordinary rules, back into the body, back into consequence. Traditional cultures did not treat this as optional. They built entire educational systems around it because they understood the hard truth. Human consciousness can destabilize very easily, not because it is evil, but because it is incredibly powerful. And power without container becomes immediate danger. The old trickster figures belong here. Hermes in Greece, Coyote in the Americas, Eshu in West Africa. Boundary crossers who deliver insight but also create intense confusion. Tricksters remind cultures that intelligence without maturity can turn wisdom into utter chaos. Children recognize this archetype instinctively. The playful rule breaker who opens doors but also tests limits. That is why traditional societies paired curiosity with elders, initiation structures, and strict containment. The same force that opens the door to insight can also lead someone into the underworld of their own psyche before they are actually ready for that encounter. The deeper pattern I was beginning to recognize was the descent, not metaphorical, but psychological. Certainty dissolves. A person confronts what he has avoided. If the descent is navigated properly, he returns with something usable. Clarity, humility, responsibility. The modern world often pretends we can skip this. We train men for jobs, for status, for productivity, but not for the descents that arrive through loss, through spiritual opening, through addiction, through fear, or through identity ruptures. So when the labyrinth appears, as it does for many men across the planet, there is no map, no elders, no rite of passage, just the mind alone with intensity. The first contact with depth often feels meaningful before it becomes intelligible. A man mistakes the message for mastery. He thinks seeing the pattern means he knows how to carry it. He does not. That is why this forgotten education matters. Not because it is romantic, but because it is a practical survival tool. And its core is still the thread. Stabilize your sleep. Regulate your body. Respect law and consequence. Stay within community. Remain accountable. Remain disciplined. Not because these things make you less spiritual, but because they do something more profound. They make you less likely to confuse intensity for truth. Curiosity opens the door to the maze. Only the thread brings you back out with something real to offer.